The movie begins in a kingdom and introduces a girl named Ella. Her mother and aunt are fairies, and there is also a powerful fairy called the Big Fairy. When the Big Fairy learns that a fairy has a daughter, she decides to give Ella a magic gift. However, the Big Fairy always makes mistakes with her magic. When Ella's mother and aunt hear that she is coming, they try to hide Ella, but they fail, and the Big Fairy finds her. As the Big Fairy prepares to give her gift, Ella starts crying loudly. To calm her down, the Big Fairy uses magic to make her sleep. Then, she gives Ella a special gift, the ability to always obey others. Ella's mother is angry and says that this is a bad gift, but the Big Fairy refuses to change it and leaves. As Ella grows up, her life becomes difficult. Because of the magic, she has to follow every order, whether it is good or bad. After some time, Ella's mother becomes very sick and is taking her last breaths. Before dying, she tells Ella to never reveal her gift to anyone, or they might misuse it. She also advises her to always listen to her heart because it will help her make the right decisions. While talking, Ella's mother gives her a special locket, and then she passes away. Years later, Ella grows up, but her family's land is taken by the king. To protect their home, Ella's father marries a wealthy woman. After the marriage, the stepmother moves in with her two daughters. However, it is clear that she does not like Ella. One day, Ella's stepsisters see her necklace and demand to have it. And because of her magical gift, Ella has no choice but to give it to them. Then, they say they like her room too, and order her to give it to them. Once again, she moves to the lower part of the house, even though she does not want to. After a few days, Ella's father leaves for work. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the prince, who is traveling with his uncle. However, the uncle was not a good ruler. He took land from the people to make money. But the prince had no idea about this, and soon, he was going to become the new king. One day, Ella goes to the market with her friend. The prince also arrives there to give a speech. All the girls in the kingdom adore the prince and are crazy about him. But Ella is different. She is angry at the prince because of the loss of her family's land. So, she and her friends start shouting against him. Prince notices Ella and feels drawn to her. Among the huge crowd, she is the only girl who is not obsessed with him. She speaks with confidence and honesty, which impresses him. However, Ella's stepsister sees this and gets angry. She orders Ella to go home, and because of her magical gift, Ella has to obey. After finishing his speech, the prince prepares to leave, but the excited girls break the stage and rush toward him. Seeing this, the prince runs away into the jungle. As Ella is walking through the jungle, the prince accidentally bumps into her. Before she can react, he quickly covers her mouth with his hand, and they both hide behind some bushes. The group of girls chasing the prince runs in another direction. Then Ella starts to leave. The prince, confused by her anger, keeps asking why she is upset, but Ella ignores him. Frustrated, the prince finally orders her to stop. Because of her magical gift, Ella is forced to obey and stand still. At that moment, a carriage comes speeding toward Ella. Due to the curse, she is unable to move. Just before the carriage can hit her, the prince quickly pulls her aside. Once the carriage passes, they both get up, but before Ella can say anything, her stepsisters arrive. The older stepsister tells Ella to go, and she then tries to talk to the prince, but he has no interest in her and runs off. Ella's older stepsister starts to suspect something strange. Even though Ella is her stepsister, she always listens to every command without question. Realizing she can take advantage of this, the stepsister tells Ella to steal shoes from a shop. Ella don't wanna, but still she is forced to obey. After that, they make Ella steal many more things, and a soldier sees Ella stealing and tries to catch her. Panicked, Ella runs, but police capture her, handcuffed. Later, Ella's stepmother bails her out of jail, but scolds her harshly. When asked why she stole, her older stepsister whispers in her ear, "Say that your best friend told you to steal." Even though Ella doesn't want to lie, and falsely blames her friend. Later, when Ella's best friend visits her house, her stepmother forces her to break their friendship. Heartbroken, she tells her friend, "We can't be friends anymore. Please leave." Losing her best friend makes Ella extremely sad. Just then, her aunt arrives and tells her, "My child, you must find the Big Fairy. Only she can undo the gift that has become a curse." Hearing this, Ella feels hopeless and says, "But how will I find her?" Ella's aunt then brings out a book and shows it to her. Curious, Ella asks, "What kind of book is this?" Her aunt explains, "A few years ago, I was using magic on my friend, but I made a mistake. Because of that, my friend turned into this book. Now, this book can help us find the Big Fairy." Soon, it reveals that the Big Fairy is in a place called Giant Valley. After Ella secretly leaves her house, taking the book with her, the book works like a magical map. Following its guidance, Ella stays on the right path. As she passes through the jungle, she suddenly hears someone screaming. She follows the sound and discovers an elf tied up by some people who are bullying him. Angered, Ella asks them to let him go. The men laugh at her and mockingly say, "Look, this girl will break our legs." But because of her gift, she actually starts breaking their legs. She beats them badly and frees the elf. The elf starts telling his story. He explains, "People think elves are only meant for entertainment, but I want to be a lawyer. But the problem is, only humans can become lawyers in this kingdom, and I plan to speak to the prince about it." Ella then shares her own story. "I'm on my way to Giant Valley." Hearing this, the elf warns her, "You can't go alone. It's too dangerous. But if you want, I can come with you." Ella agrees, and together, they begin their journey. Meanwhile, back at the kingdom, preparations are underway for the prince's coronation. Soon, he will officially become king. The entire city receives invitations to the event, which will also serve as an opportunity for the prince to choose a bride from among the attendees. At Ella's house, her aunt finds an invitation meant specifically for Ella, but Ella's stepmother snatches the letter away. She decides that she and her daughters will go to the ceremony. That night, the prince's soldiers arrive in the elf village. They begin capturing elves and taking them to the palace to perform at the upcoming event. Ella and the elf quickly hide. Once the soldiers leave, they continue their journey. As they pass through a jungle, they are suddenly surrounded by a group of large, strange-looking people. These creatures capture Ella and the elf and prepare to cook them for a meal. Just as they are about to be thrown into a pot, the prince arrives with his soldiers. He bravely fights the strange creatures. Ella then learns that these creatures are the same ones who killed the prince's parents years ago. Furious, the prince does not take revenge. Instead, he gives them one last chance to change. Ella had expected the prince to act differently, but his kindness and self-control impress her. After this, the prince turns to Ella and asks, "What are you doing here?" Ella finally answers, "I'm searching for my fairy godmother. She's in a place called Giant Valley." Hearing this, the prince immediately offers, "I'll go with you." Ella isn't too eager to take him along, but the elf convinces her. And so, the prince, along with his soldiers, joins them on their journey to Giant Valley. During this, Elf takes the opportunity to speak to the prince and says, "Prince, I want to be a lawyer, not an entertainer like other elves. But because of an unfair rule, only humans can become lawyers." The prince replies, "I didn't know about this. Uncle handles all these matters. When I become king, I'll look into it." Ella tells the prince, "You are the prince. You can bring change. You should listen to people's problems and work to solve them." The prince listens to her words carefully, and for the first time, he realizes Ella is right. After a long journey, they finally reach Giant Valley. Here, they see massive giants, but despite their size, the king's soldiers are cruelly beating them and forcing them to work. Ella immediately starts searching for the big fairy, but she finds out that the fairy is not there. However, a grand festival is happening in Giant Valley that night, and the prince insists to stay. Ella agrees to stay because of his request. That evening, the prince meets with the giant king, discussing their problems and working together to find solutions. Watching this, Ella starts to believe in the prince again. She sees his kindness and leadership, and slowly, she begins to admire him. During the festival, Ella and the prince, they dance together. As they dance, she opens up to him. "I've been searching for my godmother fairy for a long time. That's why I came here," she tells him. Hearing this, the prince says, "I can help you. Everyone in my kingdom has a record. We can check the records to find her address." The next morning, they leave Giant Valley and return to the prince's kingdom. Upon arriving at the palace, the prince immediately takes Ella to the royal records room. As Ella begins searching through the records, the prince goes to meet his uncle and told him, "I like Ella a lot, and I will marry her." His uncle's expression darkens. He is not happy at all. The truth is, the prince's uncle has always wanted to rule the kingdom himself. If the prince marries and takes full control, his own power will be lost. The prince's uncle secretly met with Ella's stepsister and made a deal with her. He promised that if she helped him get rid of Ella, he would make sure she married the prince instead. Ella's stepsister tells him about Ella's magical curse. The prince's uncle went to Ella and commanded her to kill the prince when he proposed to her, handing her a knife. Before leaving, the uncle gave her another command. She could not tell anyone about this. Ella was desperate not to harm the prince, so she ran far away from the palace and asked an elf to tie her to a tree outside the city. She then instructed the elf to gather the other elves. As night fell, the curse began pulling Ella back toward the palace. She wished to see the big fairy. Miraculously, the big fairy appeared. Ella told her the truth, explaining that the gift she had given her was actually a curse. However, the big fairy refused to take it back, instead free her from the chains, dressed her in a beautiful gown. At the palace, the prince was overjoyed to see Ella again and took her to a special place where he proposed her. As she pulled out the knife, she suddenly remembered her mother's last words. "Always listen to your heart, for it will show you the right path." She dropped the knife. Unfortunately, the prince saw saw the knife's reflection in a mirror and misunderstood the situation. Thinking she had betrayed him, he immediately called his guards, and Ella was locked in a prison cell. Meanwhile, the elf returned with the other elves and giants as Ella had instructed and freed Ella. She looked into the magical record book and saw that the prince's uncle was poisoning the royal crown, intending to paralyze the prince once he wore it. Rushing to the coronation ceremony, Ella screamed for everyone to stop, exposing the prince's uncle for his crimes. Just as the uncle's pet snake lunged at the prince, Ella swiftly kicked it away, saving him. Furious, the prince's uncle lost control and admitted to all his crimes, murdering the king and queen, stealing land, and plotting to become king himself. In his arrogance, he placed the poisoned crown on his own head. Within moments, he collapsed and died. Ella's elder stepsister tried one last time to control her, ordering her to obey. But Ella simply laughed and declared that she had broken the curse herself. In the end, Ella and the prince got married in a grand ceremony, bringing peace and happiness back to the kingdom.